Hello, this is Real World Audio, and with this groundbreaking little video, I'd like to just redefine what sound perception is. And I will give you guys the entire scale of how we perceive sound. So, both in frequency range, actually, I will be focusing mostly on the frequency range for now, and sharing and summarizing information that will hopefully make the entire topic much more clear. So basically today we think that 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz is what we can hear, right? And for hi-fi gear, this is the expectation that it should cover the range from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And then we are all set. And it's not as easy as that, because what we hear is not 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, even if you have perfect hearing, but what you hear depends on the volume, on the sound pressure level that you are listening to. So if you listen at an average volume versus an extreme volume, extremely high or extremely quiet, then this range will shrink or expand extremely. And why is that? I think all of you have already heard about the Fletcher-Munson curve, which today is called as equal loudness contours. So basically describes the human perception of sound. So basically, if there's a sound like 20 hertz, same SPL as 2 kilohertz and 20 kilohertz, we will not hear them as equal volume. We will hear them as drastically different volumes, but it also depends on the SPL. So if it's like really high, if you are listening to it like at 160 dB, then it will be close to same volume, which literally means that you will go almost deaf. And regardless of listening to 20 hertz or 20 kilohertz, it will hurt your ears and make you just grab your ears and trying to cover them from the extreme sound pressure. But if you listen to it at very close whisper software, you won't hear 20 hertz and you won't hear 20 kilohertz, even if you inherited the best pair of ears and the best trained ears on the planet. And that's because our hearing is centered to between 2 to 3 kilohertz. And if you listen to whisper quiet music that you can barely hear, this is what you can hear at the softest whispers. It will be 2 to 3 kilohertz. And as you go higher in volume, this narrow range in the mid-range will start to open up both to the highs and both to the lows. So let's get into it. Now this is something a little bit different and an addition. So here, those are the equal loudness contours, and basically it shows you that you see here we are talking about 100 phon, which means that at 2 kilohertz, like 100 dB sound pressure level, and you hear it as 100 dB for a quite wide range, and then it starts to go up. And then if you go lower, then the requirement to actually hear the sound at all will go exponentially higher, both low end and both high end. And if we would go higher than this, we are at 100 phon. If we go to 140, it would be almost flat, as I have explained before. But now, I'm also mentioning here another phenomenon, which is that the perception of sound also follows this contour, and in the opposite of that. Because why is it the opposite? Because when you see this U shape, it means that for these sounds which are lower in frequency, you need them to be higher in volume to hear them at the same volume as the sounds here, and that applies the same for the high frequency as well. And that means that centered on the mid-range, centered here, this is the center of the frequency range that has to be reproduced by your system. And if that frequency range extends equally towards both ends, it will sound natural. And let's say that your loudspeaker can reproduce 60 Hertz to 16 kilohertz. That corresponds to the mid of this curve. So you are missing the real bottom end, but you are missing the top end. So basically it makes your ear think, even if the volume is louder, that we are at this part of the curve and we are not hearing the bottom end and the top end, because the music must be quieter than what we hear. And yes, this is because the ear cannot accurately gauge the exact SPL of the sound. One of the mechanisms our brain calculates and computes what was the SPL of the sound is what is the ratio of the low-end frequencies and high-end frequencies compared to the mid-range. And based on that, it can calculate what was the volume. And if your loudspeaker has like 60 Hertz to 16 kilohertz, then even if you play it really loud, your brain will calculate that it's not playing as loud as it's playing, that it's probably playing quieter, but it will still sound natural. However, let's say you buy a modern bookshelf speaker that plays from 60 Hertz to 25 kilohertz, then this window is skewed. So basically you hear this top end range, but you don't hear the bottom end range. So now your brain can calculate that, oops, this end is missing. And the calculations your brain is giving to your higher cognitive centers about what you hear as sound coming from the speakers, it will tell your brain that the information you are receiving doesn't compute, it's not accurate, something is missing. So that's why it's important that if you buy a loudspeaker that goes well beyond 20 kilohertz, then you should also make sure that it goes down to 20 hertz. Otherwise it will not sound balanced. It will sound your subconscious will get it as a cue to stay restless. And even if you can't put your fingers around what's happening, it will bug you and you don't know why it's bugging you. Now you know it's bugging you because the window of opportunity is skewed and the frequency range you are getting is not centered in the center of the equal loudness contour. Okay, so basically with that in mind, what we hear during an average listening session is 30 Hertz to 17 kilohertz. That's right. And that's because if we are here on the Fletcher-Munson curve, if you listen at an average volume, then basically the SPL requirement for frequencies below 30 Hertz are so high that your music material cannot reproduce it above the level of audibility. So the music was recorded, let's say, with this curve. If we push the SPL down, so the volume button, volume control goes down here, the curve the system is reproducing is this, but the ear would need this extreme curve, which is kind of like the loudness boost. That's why the loudness boost is to compensate for that. And however, I would really advise against using the loudness boost, because even though it feels good, but it will be super handy to destroy your hearing and cause premature loss of your hearing faculties. And and then please take this as a very, very serious warning. Of course, if you engage the loudness button, then it will sound much more impressive, much more enjoyable in the short term, but your ears will adapt to it and they will start to think it as normal volume, and the bass you will perceive it less and less, because part of the aging process of our ear is that the curves are getting more and more higher and higher and higher on both ends, and that's the hearing loss is. So it's very rare that you actually lose a certain part of your frequency range and you cannot hear at all. Much more common happening is that the sensitivity of the ear there is just becomes so low that now you hear like plus 20 dB or more to hear it, compared to how it was when you were in your 20s. And when you push that loudness button, then you push your ear, I mean your brain, to respond in a way to filter out that excessive energy, because it's making problems for your brain. When you have too much high frequencies, too much low frequencies, it causes processing problems for your brain centers, and that will tell your brain to desensitize the processing of that information, and it will show to you as loss of hearing. And there's a reason why there's that bloody volume control, that when it's high up, there's a lot of bass, lot of highs, lot of listening fatigue. You turn it down, there's no listening fatigue, because the bass and the highs are not at that extreme high level that overload our ears and our brains. And not ears, the brains actually, because the ear doesn't really mind the sound pressure levels. It's always the lower processing centers in the brain that get overloaded and which signal to your consciousness that you have listening fatigue and it's too loud or distorted or something is going on. So basically what's happening is, at normal listening level, this is the range a person hears who has perfect hearing. So if you can hear from 20 Hz to 20 kHz on a listening test, during a normal level listening session, this is the range you are going to hear. You will not hear 20 kHz because it has a volume requirement that you need to play it at a concert level. And if you are in a scenario that you want to play music much louder and you always play like super loud music, then that makes your brain to adapt, and it desensitizes your processing centers. So in 10 years, 20 years, even though you are playing it at 100 plus dB, the hearing range will be this or even less. And if you put the volume down to a normal listening level, then you will be lucky if you can hear from 60 Hz to 12 kilohertz. So that's why, guys, I'm telling all the time, it's absolutely crucial, absolutely vital that when you go for with your system decisions, go for the ones that allow you to play quieter. Because if you go for louder and louder, you are busting up your ears, you are training, you are actively teaching your brain to ignore what you hear, because it has to ignore that insanely high energy levels that come from these low energy sounds and extreme high energy sounds. Otherwise you would go nuts if your ear would not filter those out. Then after 5-10 minutes you would have such listening fatigue and such a splitting earache that after every audio session we would end up in the ER, requiring ear treatment. So now let's see what are the extremes. What is the frequency range extremes that we can experience? And let's make it in the next video because we are at 15 minutes already. So thank you guys for carrying on. Please like, subscribe, and be mindful of your volume control button. Bye bye. Or knob.